I think, so actually to begin with, I wanted to Shira sent me after this already was what, 3 weeks ago, when we were talking about the Pishpesh Adrom, and you sent me this beautiful midrash, which I brought up here on my screen. At least I hope I have. Yes, I have. Okay. Okay, so I think we'll start from. This is a midrash in Parshat Ki Tisa, and this is the Midrash Yoma, the Vorsha edition. As opposed, there are other editions of the Tanchuma. The other one, which I usually learn from, is Buber's edition. That's Shlomo Buber. That was Martin Buber's grandfather, who was a well-known Tamid and scholar, and he published an edition of the Tanchuma from older manuscripts, and it's a bit different than this other Tanchuma. But I checked that this particular midrash doesn't appear in his edition. It's interesting. But in any event, we'll take a look at it here. So if you remember, last time we were talking about, and we'll look through this a little bit in the Mishnah moment, we're still talking about the early part of the day in the Beit HaMikdash, and that at some point they go and they open the kishpash, right, this little door that's part of the bigger doors that lead into the ulam of the Beit HaMikdash. And the Mishnah told us, maybe we should just remind ourselves of that for a moment. It tells us in Mishnah Zayin, in Perek Shishim, Mishnah Zayin and Tamid, Balo the Pishpash Hatzfoni, when he came to the northern wicket. And then, so this is talking about the people who were Zocher to Dishun Mizbeach HaPnimi and Menorah. So in order to clean the Mizbeach HaPnimi and the Menorah, have to get into the Heichal. So first they have to go through this door. So it says, Balo the Pishpash Hatzfoni, Shnei Pishpashim hayu lo l'shar hagadol. There were two wickets to the large gates, and there's the large entryway in the Ulam. Echad b'tzafon v'echad b'daram. One was in the north, one was in the south. Sheb'daram lo nichnas bo adam me'olam. The southern one, no one ever went into that door. This was spoken of explicitly by Yechezkel, where he said, "Vayomer Elai Hashem, hashar hazeh sagur hiyeh lo yipateach v'ish lo yavo bo, ki Hashem Elokei Yisrael ba bo v'haya sagur." Hashem explicitly showing when Yechezkel has a vision of the Beit HaMikdash, Hashem tells him that this gate will always be closed, and no man will go through it. But Hashem, the Lord of Israel, will go through it, and it will be closed. In other words, for now, it will be closed. So, in that vision of Yechezkel, just a sec. Okay. That vision of Yechezkel, it's here in Vayashev oti derech shar hamikdash hachitzon. Hashem placed on the way to the the gates of the outer Mikdash, Aponeh Kadim, that faces east, Uhu Sagur, and it was closed. And this is Vayomer Elai Hashem Hashar Zeh Sagur Yiyateach. So Hashem tells him this gate is going to be closed, it will not open. A person will not enter into it, Ki Hashem Elokei Yisrael Ba'avo, because Hashem, the Lord of Israel, will come into it, Vayas Sagur, it will be closed. So in the straight reading of the pasuk, you might think that that no one's going to come into the Beit HaMikdash at all, and at least not until Hashem himself would come in. And we could understand this as vision of Beit Shlishi, and Hashem is telling him that in order for, that people will come in here until I come in. And what I think the idea is, like we saw also in the Mishkan and also in the Temple of Shlomo, this idea that Kvod Hashem comes into the Mikdash. We saw that, I think last time we looked the way it was brought down in Divrei Hayamim with the Temple, and we already saw the discussion about the Mishkan. So there has to be Kvod Hashem, which is manifest in a cloud that would come into the Mikdash. However, our Mishnah tells us that it wasn't the whole gate; it was just the southern wicket. This is the way that Chazal understood, that it was the southern wicket that Hashem was going to come through. Rashi and the Radak both bring Mishnah here that we know, that we just saw. Saguriya, Raboteinu hamidu hamikra ze b'pishpashat romi, shahaya l'shar ha'echal. Right. So our rabbis explain that explain this pasuk is talking about the southern wicket, Shayal Shar Ha'echal, that was part of the gate into the Heichal. Pishpash Petach Katan, and a pishpash is a small opening. Kach Shanina b'Masechet Midot. That's what we learn in Masechet Midot. We saw in Masechet Tamid. Shnei pishpashin hayu gadol, echad b'daram v'echad b'tzafon. Sheb'daram lo nichnas bo adam me'olam. Alav mefurash yidei Yechezkel, Ashar zeh yiyeh sagur. So that's the basic background to this pasuk, that Chazal understood it to refer to this wicket. Here in the Tanchuma, it's the context is in Parshat Kitisam el Moshe kechaloto. He gives the luchot as he finishes with them. So we'll skip actually the first part, but it goes here. Davar acher vayitenu Moshe. So this is another explanation of the words vayitenu Moshe that Hashem gave to Moshe. Zeh shomer hakatuv. This is what the pasuk means when it says "V'tni magen mishecha," and you will give me the shield of your salvation. So what's that pasuk? V'titen li magen echa v'yamincha tis'adeni. Right. So this is that Hashem. David says, "You'll me." In other words, you'll protect me, right? You'll give me the protection or the shield of your salvation. The yamincha tisadenu, in your right hand will help me. Va'anvatcha tarbi, and your ava, your humility, will be great with me or make me great. So how do we understand this here? How is that relevant? Elu Yisrael habotchim b'Kadosh Baruch Hu. So this pasuk refers to Israel who trust in the Holy One, blessed be He. That's Latitenli Magen Mishacha b'minchati sa'adeni mimino eshtat lamo. Your right hand will help me. So in the Zota Bracha, where it says in Hazina, where it says, from your right hand, Eish Lamo, there will be a fiery creed to them. And what's the last part of pasuk? And your humility will tarbeni, will make me great. So the Medrash goes off on this tangent about what is the humility of God. So it says, Yesh anav min HaKadosh Baruch Hu. It's a rhetorical question. Is there anyone more humble than the Holy One, blessed be He? Amar Rabbi Abba bar Acha. And so now we're going to bring examples of the ability of God. So Rabbi Abba says, B'noeg sheba'olam Tamid yoshev lifnei Rabbo, mamtin l'Rabbo. So the normal practice in the world is that a student sits with his master and he waits for his master. HaKadosh Baruch Hu amar liYechezkel kulei el habika v'sham adaber otach. That's this pasuk here in earlier in Yechezkel Gimel. Just a second. Here it says, Vatihi alai sham yad Hashem, and the hand of God was there upon me. Vayomer elai, and He said to me, Kum tsei el habika, go to the bika, to the how do you say bika in English? The
valley.
Yeah, let's say valley. V'shama daber otach. And there I'll speak with you. Vakum ve'etzei al biknei sham kavod Hashem omeid kavod asher ra'iti al nahar kavar ve'apol panai. So Yechezkel set up, and I went out to the valley, and here there was there the honor of God that was standing, like the honor that I saw on the river, and I fell on my face. All right, so Hashem tells him to go there, and when he goes there, when Yechezkel goes there to the Bika, Hashem is already there. And that's the point here, right? Vakum ve'bika minei kvod Hashem omed kavod asher ra'iti al nahar kavar ve'pol panai lamedcha shekidmo HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Anav gadol mizeh, right? It teaches you that the Kadosh Baruch Hu got there before him. So is that any more humble, right? In other words, right, it goes against what we think of as the normal practice, that the one who is more due honor, other people should wait for him or her, and then they should make their entrance. But the Kadosh Baruch Hu was there to greet, as it were, Yechezkel. Ki yotzei ba Moshe yedaber, v'ha'elokim yanenu b'kol. This is actually one of the most fascinating psukim in the Torah, in my mind. That right before the Aseret HaDibrot, it says that Moshe would speak, and Hashem would answer him in a voice. It should have said that God spoke, or God would speak, and Moses would answer him with a voice. Right? So again, it flips the script. It tells us that the Kadosh Baruch Hu, as it were, was humble, and Moses spoke first, and then God answered him. Kiyotzei bo, vayomer Hashem elai, hashar zeh sagur yeh lo yipateach, va'ish bo, ki Hashem Elokei Yisrael ba bo, v'haya sagur. Right, so that's the pasuk that we started with. V'yom Shabbat yipatach, v'yom HaChodesh yipatach, which is a little bit further on in the chapter there, and then explains Melech Basar V'Dam, a king, a flesh and blood king. Kvodo likanes b'shar hagad. It's his honor to enter through a large gate. Shema b'shar hakatan. Would you think, in other words, maybe through a small gate? In other words, would you think that a king go through a small gate? V'kadosh Baruch Hu b'shar hakatan. The Kadosh Baruch Hu goes through the small gate. And the Medrash here seems to already understand what we saw in the Mishnah, that this idea that's brought up in Yechezkel, that the Kadosh Baruch Hu is going to be the one to walk through that gate. It doesn't refer to the whole entrance. It refers to this Kishpash Dromi that seems to be here. So it's this small, humble entrance that's being used. And as we mentioned, I think last time we were learning the Mishnah, I was just listening to the recording. We talked about this, right? This idea of the Kishpash altogether, the way it's used in architecture, is that the small doors, the pishpashim, that's for sort of like everydays and everyday people, but you would open wide the big gate, larger doors, when you wanted to let in the king or nobility, right? So you would think that when the Kadosh Baruch Hu enters into the Beit HaMikdash, that he would go through the large gates, but in fact, Chazal understood that the Kavod Hashem is going to go through a small gate, and this is evidence of the humility of the Kadosh Baruch Hu. And then it goes on to bring other examples of the humility of the Kadosh Baruch Hu. We won't go through all of them now, but it's quite fascinating, and you can look at this. Shira, where did you take next from? Was that from Sefaria?
Yeah, Sefaria. I'm searching for Yechezkel. What's the Mefarshim about Yechezkel, the chapter, and so Radak and Rashi, and so it was clear the link between this wicked and Yechezkel for Rashi and Radak, as you told, and then I opened the commentary and. I'm not sure, but I remember it was about Nechama Leibowitz, a hint, and then in the end, I reached Tanhuma. And
wonderful.
So my assumption was we have so many midrashim about the humility and the condescendence of and kenosis from Hashem on the Har Sinai, and the first vacation scenario with Moshe Rabbeinu, and we have so many midrashim about the humility, and so it was okay, and I was very glad to find it at the end. So about Sefaria, yeah, it's always amazing to find, because if you have an idea and then follow through the ocean and you find so many association, and it's great. And also the Marbim. There is so many about new moon and looking. So the huge discussion about what can we see in the Hechal with his wickets. It's amazing.
Yes, and so I hope as time goes on, we're starting to build up a little, like you say, you're looking at your map, trying to build up a better understanding of the layout of the Beit HaMikdash, and little by little, we'll start to go through we're going now mainly through Masechet Tamid, and we're glancing over in Masechet Midot. And so sometimes we go a little bit more into Midot so we can understand these relationships. One of the things that, I'm sorry? Oh, that's Hyla. Hyla and perhaps Dove. I don't know if you're familiar with this. This book, there's a book I have. Okay. Torah HaKtuva VaMesorah. I have a feeling you can download this book from HebrewBooks.org. This is an amazing collection by Rav Hyman, who also Toldot Tanaim VaMoraim. It's also 3 volumes, and this is it's a cross-reference, basically, for like virtually every pasuk in Tanakh. It shows you the places that it's mentioned in Shas, in Yerushalmi, and in Midrash. And he did all of this before there were search engines. This is an amazing, amazing thing.
Wow.
Nowadays, you can see on my screen, I now have here in the Bar Ilan project, I can go into this pasuk in Yechezkel and click on a thing called Ksharim, and it'll basically gives me all the things it has in this book here, but I still look at Hyman's book from time to time.
Wow.
So yeah, we're fortunate nowadays. We don't have to struggle too much to get these cross references. It's quite amazing. I didn't have a chance. I was starting to look through some of these other ones, and maybe I'll get the chance to do that. Okay, but anyway, so thank you, Shira. I think that's quite fascinating. And okay, so go back to the Mishnah. We'll pick up from where we left off last time, or maybe a little bit of review because it's been a while. I just want to remind us what we're talking about here, right? So this parak is it starts with the first payis of the day, right? In the previous parak, we talked about Trumat HaDeshen, and then now we talk about the payis, and it lays out all the different things that have to be done now in the morning. We're going to refer back to this, not today, but in the future. While we're here, I don't want to point out something. Right, so this price for Mishochet, Mizorek, who's going to slaughter, who's going to sprinkle the blood. Mibidashen Mizbeach HaPnimi, who's going to remove the ash from the Mizbeach that's inside the Beit HaMikdash. Mibidashen et HaMenorah, who's going to remove the ash from the menorah. Mimale Evarim HaKebesh, and then it goes on. So, based on what we see here, we would assume that this is the order that's going to happen. That first is going to be Shchita, and then there's going to be Zrika, and then there's going to be Shum Mizbeach HaPnimi, and then Dishum HaMenorah, and then after that, they're going to bring up the Evarim HaKebesh, right? It could be that's maybe our first inclination, that this is indicative of the order of things. So one of the things we want to keep our eyes on, what is the order that as it plays out? And what's the significance of the order? Because this is one of the things that there's opinions about. And you may remember that in the Sidur, in Korbanot, there's a passage that's brought down in Korbanot. It's from the Gemara in Yoma, that Abaye Hayam Siddur Marechet Lefi Gemara, and it brings the order of the way things were done in the Beit HaMikdash according to Abaye. And it's based on a rather a somewhat complicated discussion about opinions about the order of the way things were done. So I just want to point out that this is one of the sources to keep in mind. Okay, so this, we did the first piece, and then we start off, we do the Shlita, and then he's the Mimuneh, the Kohen who's in charge, tells them to go and bring one of the sheep, and that's where we start talking about Shkat Beit HaMoked. Thomas will come back to eventually explain that a little bit better. And they go and they get the Mishnah Dal, they get the different kelim, the different instruments and vessels that they're going to need to do the avodah for the day. Mishnah Hay told us, Misha Zacha Tamid, the person who was to with Tamid, meaning to slaughter the Tamid, he would take it over and slaughter it. And talked a little bit about what happened to it after it was slaughtered and described the hooks that it would be hung up on, and they would skin it and cut it up. And so now, just a second. So right, then we talk about Misha Zacha b'dishun mizbeach hapnimi v'amnorah hayu makdimin v'arba yadam. So the people who were going to do the Dishun Mizbeach HaPnimi to clear away the ash from the Mizbeach HaKtoret, it's inside the Beit HaMikdash, and to clear the ash, and we'll see more about what the person who does the menorah, what they do. So they have to go in with their kelim, and we described, and this brings us up to the, more or less where we left off last time, that they would go into the Beit HaMikdash, that there was this wicket on the north side that one of them would have to reach their arm into and unlock the door from the inside with one lock, and then they would open another lock from the outside, and then they would go in. And then that's right, so this is talking about the Pishpasha Tzvani, and that was the wicket that they went in through. And then this is the pasuk that we were just looking at in Yechezkel. Let's just read the last part of this of Mishnah Zayin. So he took the key, and he opened the wicket. He would go into this small chamber, and into the small chamber into the Heichal. Right, there was an area between this opening of the Ubam and then into the Heichal. Until he comes to the great gate. It comes to the great gate. He would remove the it's like a beam, I can refer it, I can't think of it now in English. Like a beam that you would put on a door as a lock. What's that called? There's a word for it, I can't think of it now.
Crossbar.
Is that a crossbar?
I believe so, yes.
No, I think you may be right. Okay. I was thinking of something else, but that sounds right. I'm a little foggy right now, so thanks. The potchot would be other locks that were there, and then he would open it. And here it says, Lo haya shochet ad sheshomea kol shar hagadol sheniftach. So this goes back to what I mentioned a moment ago from the beginning, that, right, it starts off like mishochet, mizorek. So obviously you can't have the zrikat adam until there's shchita. But in theory, you could have had both, the shchita and the zrika, and then you could have the people doing the dishun mizbeach hapnimi, which in fact is what's going to happen. But what it tells us is the person who is going to shecht the Korban Tamid, he wouldn't shecht until he would hear the sound of the large gate and opening into the heichal, that it would be open. He would wait for that sound before he would do the shechita. So, we haven't learned for a while, and we're doing this kind of slowly. But if you remember, right after the payis is when they have the person go up to look to if the time has come for shechita. And once the time for the shechita, things start to happen. So all these things presumably are happening relatively quickly, that the person is going to go and take the sheep, the place where they keep the sheep, and then these two people who are going to do the dishun mizbeach, the dishun hamnorah, they're going to make their way through this, the wicket and the great gate into the Beit HaMikdash, and when they hear the opening into the into the Heichal itself, the shochet was waiting to do the shechita until that time. That's what he was waiting to hear. We'll just read this Bartanur here. Minata el Heichal, right? So they would go from this small chamber into the Heichal, v'holech b'chalal ha'Heichal ad hashar hagadol. So they would go into this this that was in the Heichal, or presumably right in front of the Heichal, till they got to the great gate. Shebesof ovi hakotel mibifnim, but that was at the end of the thickness of the wall from inside. And he would open. In other words, meaning that there was this wall. They would go through the wood. They would come into this small chamber, and they would go the length of this chamber, which was only a few amot, and then they would come to the opening of the Heichal, ufotcho, and he would open it, uvalo el shar hasheni v'omed bifnim ufotcho. Then we'd come into the shar and open that and go in. The neger is the bariach, which we're translating now as spar. Seems to me there's still another word for it, I can't think, sorry. Shemavriach miktzei haderet lektzei haderet, right? So it would be this crossbar that would go from one end of the door to the other end of the door. Or acher neger hainu hayated hanautz achorei haderet b'nekev sheba askupa. Right. Another possibility is not that neger. It's related to the word for carpentry, like nagarut. Right. It's something that's cut from wood. So one possibility is it's like this large piece of wood, so it serves as this crossbar, as this kind of bolt on the door, or another kind of a bolt, which is it's a kind of a stake that would be stuck behind the door in a hole that's in the doorway. So somehow he would have to chin and remove it. It was something that was like a stop to the door. It's not clear to me if it's achorei hadar, if it's behind the door. Maybe it means not behind like inside, but behind like to the side. But it was something stopping the door from being opened. Remove the neger v'eta potchot. The potchot, the Bartanur says, is hamanulim v'amaskerot. The locks and the things that closed it. Right, there were other kind of locks and closings on it that they had to open. So now we come to Mishnah Chet, and a fascinating Mishnah, right? So this is a bit of a digression, but because the Mishnah mentions that the person who slaughtered wouldn't slaughter until he would hear the sound of the great gate being open. So now we talk about this idea, in case you're wondering, was it hard for the Kohen who's going to shech the Tamid, if it was hard for him to hear this gate, they could hear the opening of the gate all the way in Yericho, which is quite amazing. But not only that, Miricho hayu shamin kol hamagrefa. From Yericho, they could also hear the sound of the magrefa. The magrefa was a musical instrument. Here we'll just see the Bartanur Miricho kol shar hagadol. And the Bar points out, Yerushalayim ad Yericho eser parsaot. From Jerusalem to Yericho was 10 parsaot. It was a long ways away. Hamagrefa min kli nigun shahaya b'mikdash. It was a kind of musical instrument that was in the mikdash. Asara nekavin hayubo. It had 10 holes. V'kol arvi echad motzi mea minei zemer. And each one of these holes could bring out, could produce 100 musical sounds. V'kolon nishma ad l'meuk. And its sound could be heard very far away. Me'yericho hayu shomin kol ha'etz ben katin. From Yericho, they could hear the sound of the wood that Ben Katin made the muchni of the kior, which we've discussed a couple of times here, right? That was some kind of a contraption that, and we saw different opinions about exactly what it was, but it's something that would be used to either lower and raise the entire kior in down below so that it would be connected to waters that were underneath the Beit HaMikdash. And so presumably when it would be lowered and when it would be raised, it would make a certain amount of noise. So that noise, or that sound, that could also be heard all the way to Yericho. Yericho Yushamin Kol Gedilos. And they could also hear the sound of Gvini, who, when he would announce, when he would make his announcements. So we'll digress from it. We'll see the Bartanur on both of these. Ben Katin, everybody should know this already. Shem Adan v'chohin gadol haya. It's the name of a person. He was himself a high priest. Yasag galgal l'kiyor l'shako bevor. Shelo yu meimav nifsalim belina. He made a wheel for the kiyor in order to lower it to a cistern so that its waters would not become pasul by being left overnight, right? So as long as they are connected to the cistern, which is waters that are connected to the ground, then they become pasul, even though they are in a kli sharet, right? We mentioned this in an earlier sure that the things that are left in a kli sharet overnight become pasul. And that's why the Rambam had a different idea of what this was that Ben Katin made. He thought the muchni was actually this extra kind of dude, like this extra kind of water holder that was connected above the kior. And his idea is that since it wasn't a kli sharet, even though water would be left there overnight, it wouldn't become pasul. It wasn't consecrated sharet. But and so what would be the eights? It's not clear from the Rambam, but I think the eights that would be connected with that, I think we mentioned, must have been some way of opening. You had to like pull like a wooden handle or something to open it so that water would flow from it into the kior, into the basin where the water went out for the kohanim to wash their hands and legs. In any event, one way or the other, it made enough sound that it could be heard all the way to Yericho. Right? Anything that has become coded by being in one of the klei sharet, one of the kelim that was used in the Beit HaMikdash, nifsal lina, becomes pasul if it's left over in Uvi Yotzei. It also becomes pasul if it's the area of the Beit HaMikdash. It's a pasul bitvul yom, that if somebody was a tvul yom,
You asking for a definition of Tvul Yom?
Yeah, it's Yom.
A Tul Yom is somebody who's impure, has immersed, but he's still in a state of impurity until Ba HaShemesh.
Right, very good. So he's actually in a kind of intermediate stage. He's tahor for certain things and tameh for other things. So in this case, it's Tvul Yom who would come into contact with something was in the Kli Shared, he would make pasul. And when they would raise the kiyum out of the cistern, the kadesh bo yedehem v'ragleihem, to wash their legs, hayakol hagalgal nishma ad Yericho. Then the sound of this wheel could be heard all the way to Yericho. Who was Gvini Karos? Who's Gvini? Kohen Sheshmo Gvini. There was a Kohen, his name was Gvini. Hayam achriz b'chol boker b'beit hamikdash imdu chohanim la'avodatchem. He would call the other Kohanim, rise up, priests, to do your work. Right? So people could hear him all the way in Yericho. Me Yericho ayu shomim kol hechalil. Chalil in modern Hebrew we think of it as a flute. The Bartanu here says a couple of things, right? He gives three perushim: salmitzlis belaz, or ba'aravi mazmar, the kolon ishma merachmin pifri belaz. And I'm not sure what these things are. I forgot to look these up for the class. But they're not all flutes. They're different kinds of musical instruments. But at least one of the reasons that we think of a chalil as being a flute is because it seems to come from the word halal. It's hollow. It would be a hollow instrument. But you could also imagine other instruments that might also be hollow. Yushamim kol hatzaltzal. Tzaltzal is sambli belaz, which sounds to me like cymbal, like cymbals, something like that. It's also some kind of a musical instrument. Miricha yushamim kol hashir. From Yericho, they could hear the sound of the song. Levim would be singing. That was part of their service in the temple. So they could hear singing all the way into Yericho. Miricha hayushamim kol hashofar. From Yericho, they could hear the sound of the shofar. The Yeshomrim, af kol shel kohenu, b'sha'ah shu maskir et Hashem b'yom HaKippurim. Some people say that they could hear the sound of the high priest at the time that he would mention the name of Hashem on Yom Kippur. So all these things that could be heard from the temple, they could hear it all the way in Yericho, which I think is quite fascinating. And I think maybe I mentioned this at another time, maybe when we were in Rosh Hashanah, but it seems to me that one of the reasons that this could be, right, and I don't think this is mentioned here that it was a great miracle, but I think that it gives us an indication of how much sound pollution we have nowadays, that we can't imagine hearing a sound that takes place, on Har HaBayit all the way to Yericho. But it's conceivable that back then, even though it was very far away, with the sound waves moving in the direction without impediment, that they could be heard from very far away.
Also, I mean, sound in the desert carries amazingly well.
That's what I mean. So we're going from Bayit, which is up about 800 meters above sea level, and then it could go down, and like I say, if it's unimpeded, presumably it could be heard very far away. There's something else I want to say about that, but let's just finish till the end here. From Yericho, they could smell the smell of the incense that was on the Mizbeach Apnimi in the Beit HaMikdash. Mar Eliezer ben. What's that? From Yericho, Yimerichim Ech Bitzumakta. Mar Rabbi Eliezer ben Diglai. Rabbi Eliezer ben Diglai said, Izima Yuleveit Abba Bahar Michvar. My father, right, the house of my father owned goats on Mount Michvar, the place. Vayumit ashtot bereach pitum haktoret, and they would pass gas from the smell of the ktoret, which is quite an interesting anecdote. So these are all things, right, that we've digressed on, like I say, because the Mishnah here earlier said that the shochet who shech the korban tamid, he wouldn't start the shechit till he would hear the sound of the opening of the gate. And then we say all these things that you could hear from, you could hear Yicho, and that the smells could go out very far. So actually, before I say anything else about this, I want to welcome Moshe Chaim Rosenberg, who I haven't seen or heard from in quite a long time, who just entered, and thank you for coming. Does anybody have any feeling or understanding about why the Mishnah wants to tell us all of things, right? In other words, it's a digression from the main thing we're talking about. But why is it important for us to know that you could hear all of these sounds from Yericho that came from the temple, or smell these smells that came from the temple? Why would that be important? And why Yericho?
It shows the power of the Beit HaMikdash, the immensity of it, not in size, but in the service itself.
Yeah, I like that. That's very good. In other words, it made a big impression to the surrounding area, or at least into that direction.
I was actually thinking along very different lines, that it means that they're in essence, although the Kohanim were doing their avodah in an enclosed space, they're witnesses to what they're doing. So it wasn't. There were witnesses to the avodah of the Kohanim. In some sense, what they're doing was done in public, as it were.
Yeah. I mean, I'm not sure that that's so different than what Michael Schwartz is saying. Yeah, it's another.
It's in some sense it's saying. I think the difference is that what Michael was saying is testifying to the power of the Beit HaMikdash, and in some sense, the fact that they're witnesses testifies to the accountability. In some sense, the Kohanim are accountable to whoever's within sort of earshot, or whoever can smell the Ketoret.
It's an interesting idea. I have to think about it. I honestly wouldn't have thought about it like that, because we have this image of the Kohanim as Rizim, right? The Kohanim are very zealous. And it's not like we would have thought otherwise. Like, it's not that we would have thought that they were being negligent to their duty.
Well,
but I might.
Oh, go
yeah,
ahead.
go.
I mean, we wouldn't. I mean, this is not to say that they were negligent, but that, people might think they're negligent, or that there may be some kind of perception, true or not.
Okay, maybe. I mean, I'm not sure I see any indication of that idea per se from the
Fair
Mishnah,
enough.
but I would take the basic idea of what you're saying and say it a little differently. I would put it in a different light, which in this sense, and that's, I'm not so sure that what you're saying is so different than what Michael Schwartz is saying, that I understand this to mean that the taking from the beginning of what you said, that the Beit HaMikdash is this enclosed space. The area where the Kohanim do their work is closed off to everybody except Kohanim. And then right in front of them, you have the area where the Leviim are singing, and that's closed off to other people as well, right? There's a hierarchy of people and how far they can get into the compound. So in this enclosed space, even though you would think that the only people who get to not participate but get to experience the avodah are only the people who are inside. But in fact, what we see is that even people from far away could experience what was happening in the Beit HaMikdash in real time, because they could hear the opening of the door, hear the sound of the musical instruments, hear even the muchni, like all these different things. I have a feeling that there's deeper levels to this that we haven't thought about yet. But that's why I'm throwing it out to you to think about. Maybe it's something to come back to another time.
I'm wondering if
Question arises, why Yericho? Why not some other city in Israel?
Yes. So why? So what would you say to that?
I would say that it links the miracles of the temple to the miracle of Yericho when they first came into the land.
Very interesting. That could be. Right, there could be a linkage between Yericho and the temple from that point of view.
I'm wondering if this. Oh, go ahead.
I would just say, it seems to me that at least one of the reasons has to do with the geography. In other words, I'm not sure that people to the west could hear and experience the same things that the people to the east were. So, in other words, on the shot level, it's saying that from Yericho, these things and smell these things, at least somewhere near Yericho. So that has to do, like the things they would smell, that's going to have to do with the wind pattern. And by the same token, probably also the sound waves. So I have a feeling that part of it is just practical. But I don't disagree with what you're saying. I think the significance of Yericho as a place as being the first place that Bnei Israel come to start the actual conquering of the land, that can't be ignored.
I'm wondering
Michael,
I'm sorry, I've been interrupting. I'm wondering if this is a way, the fact that it's specifically Jericho, I'm wondering if this is a way about talking about time as well as about space. The fact that Jericho is the most ancient city, that it has, that it's also, so I'm wondering if there's a way, it's saying that, okay, this particular avodah echoes not only such a great distance, but in some sense it echoes through eternity, as it were.
Maybe, I think, not that it's not that it's the most ancient city, right? But it was the first city that was conquered, right? Shortly after they conquered Ha'ai, there are other places, there are other cities that are contemporaneous with Yericho. But yeah, I think along the lines of what Dov was saying, right? That it's echoing. I will also point out that, of course, what sounds associate with Yericho?
Shofar.
The shofar, right? Or it's that the conquering of Yericho was accompanied by the shofar. So the blast of the shofar were in Yericho, and we don't know. Maybe they were heard all the way into Yerushalayim, but here, now the people in Yericho, they hear the sound of the shofar coming from Yerushalayim. Anyway, you can think about it. I just thought it was an interesting thing, and I mean, it's not for nothing that the Mishnah would digress on all these things. Let's go on though. I'm not sure we're actually going to get through all of this today after all, but I want to start. We're on Mishnah Tet. Misha zacha b'dishun mizbeach hapnimi. So the person who merited, who won the lottery to do of the mizbeach inside, nichnas v'natal hateni, he would go in and he would take the basket, v'hinichol lefanav, and he would put it in front of him, v'haya chofein v'notein letocho, and then he take handfuls and put into it. So what is he putting in? What is he putting the basket in front of, and what is he taking handfuls of?
He's
Ashes
putting
from the ashes from the altar. And
He's taking the ashes from the altar.
ashes from the
So he's put
altar, from the
yes,
from the Ketoret.
right. So he's taking the ashes from the Mizbeach HaKtoret. He's come in. He's put the basket in front of the altar, and now he's basically scooping out the ashes and putting them in this teni, into this kind of basket-like kli, which we're going to use to remove them to take next to the Mizbeach. And in the end, right, in other words, after he's taken whole handfuls, he would clean the rest into v'hinicho, and then he would put it down, and he would go out. Misha zacha b'dishun hamnorah, the person who was going to do the dishun of the menorah, nichnas. Okay, this is where we need to pay close attention. And we actually looked at this in a previous shiur, I think in a couple of previous shiurim. And we want to pay close attention to what's going on here. And we'll try to get through as much of the Bartanura today as we can, so that we'll see how he understands this. Nichnas u'matzah shnei neirot mizrachiyim dokim. When he comes in and he finds the two eastmost lights that are lit, midashena chashar, then he would take from the rest of them, right? So there's 7 candles burning, there's 7 lights burning, or maybe not all of them are burning, but there's 7 branches on the menorah. So if he comes in and he sees the 2 easternmost lights that they're still burning, so then he'll go, he cleans for 5. And he leaves these burning in their place. So before I go on, we've mentioned many times before, there's a machloket about how the menorah was placed into Mikdash. Was it placed going from north to south or from east? So the way we'll see from the Bartanura that the idea in this Mishnah is going to be based on, it's based on the idea that the menorah was not like it is in this in this picture. Here's the menorah. Here it looks like it's going from north to south. Let's see the other one. Yeah, in here also. It's just, I guess it was easier for them to portray it that way. The way we're going to understand Mishnah is it's talking about, it's based on the opinion that the menorah was on the southern wall. It was on the southern wall, and it was going from it was going from east to west, meaning that as you would enter, let's go back to our little map here. This is Shar HaGadol, right, which we talked about. This is the Mizbeach Zahav, that's the Mizbeach HaPnimi, where the Torah was. Walking in, you're coming up from the east, and you're facing west as you go through the Shar HaGadol. This is the southern wall, and this is the southern wall. And according to this idea, the menorah was not like this going from north to south. It would have been from east to west. So there would have been so the 7 lights are going from west to east, east to west. So when you walk in, the 2 easternmost ones will be the first 2 lights that you would encounter to your left. Walk in, the menorah would be on your left, and the first 2 lights, those are the easternmost ones that the Mishnah is talking about. So nichnas matzah shnei nerot mizrachiyim dolkim. So he walked in, the person who's going to be cleaning the menorah, and if he finds the 2 easternmost lights lit, then midashen at a shar. So he's going to clean the other 5 candles, the other 5 lights. He's going to leave these lit in their place. Mitza'an shekavu, if he walked in and he found the 2 easternmost lights had gone out, midashnan likan min hadolkim, then he would clean those 2, and he would light them from the ones that were lit. In other words, the other ones were still lit. He would light from one of the other branches of the menorah. And then afterwards, he would clean the rest. So that's the point. Either way, at the beginning of his dishun, if the 2 easternmost lights are lit, then he goes right to the other 5. But if they're not lit, he has to make sure that they are lit before he cleans the other 5. The Even Haita Lifnei HaMenorah, the stone in front of the menorah, Uva Shalosh Ma'alot, it had 3 steps. Sha'aleh HaKohen Omed Umetiv Et HaNerot. And that's what he would stand on when he was going to clean the Neirot. V'hiniach et hakuz ala shniya v'yatsa. He placed the kuz, which is this kli that it's parallel to the teni that was for holding the ash of the Mizbeach. There was a kuz to hold the ash of the menorah. And that's the end of the Mishnah, and the rest of it is the Bartanura. So let's start to get into the Bartanura. Just a second. Just in terms of the chronology here, I just want to keep our eye on the ball for a second. So what we said was that the shochet doesn't shecht until he hears the sound of the Har HaGadol when it opens. So presumably, once he hears that sound, he does do the shlita. And so he's going to do the shlita immediately prior to the people who clean the Mizbeach HaPnimi and the menorah. just not in mind. Okay, so again, in the beginning of the Mishnah, we have the person, he scoops up the ash from the altar, he puts it in the penny, and in the end, he cleans the rest. The Bartanur says, "Achrona shelo haya rak ma'at deshen," right? There was only a little bit of deshen left. Lo haya yachol likach b'chofnav. He couldn't take it with his fist. He bade sha'ar hadeshen l'tocha. He would clean, like he would like sweep it off into the tenny. Right? So first he would like reach in with his hands and take as much as he could, in clumps of the burnt ash, and then at the end he would sweep the last bits into the basket. And then he would place it lateni sham v'yatsa. He would place the basket there, and he would go out. Avamiyad lo hayam motzio, but he didn't take the basket out immediately. Shekevan shetzarich latet hadeshen etzel hamizbeach kedma kamo dishun hamnora. Ultimately, he has to take these ashes and place them next to the altar, the outside altar, on the east side, which the place where we talked about the Trumat HaDeshen from the Mizbeach itself, the big Mizbeach would be. Since he has to place that there, just like the ashes that are going to come from the menorah, mamtin ad achar zrikat tamid. He would wait until after the blood would be sprinkled on the altar from the korban tamid, right? So again, we had the shchita, right? They opened the doors. That was the signal to do the shchita. Then they go in and they do their cleaning of, this guy, first guy does the cleaning of the Mizbeach HaKtoret, but it's not time to bring the ashes out until the sprinkling is going to be done. And of course, that, I don't know how long it takes exactly, but it's going to take a little while, because right, that we talked about, they have to shech the animal, they have to skin it, they have to cut it up, and all of that, or actually, yes. So maybe during that time, the blood gets sprinkled. We'll come back to that. Anyway, mamtin ad lechat tamid, shaya oseh hatavat shtei nerot v'gomer hashlomat tishun hamnorah, because he, the other one, who's going to clean the menorah, he would clean the two eastern lights, and he would finish cleaning the menorah. V'az hayu shnehem motziin zeh hateni v'zeh hakuz. Then the two of them would go out, one of them with the teni, with the basket, one of them with the kuz, this kind of jar, for the ashes from the menorah. They would pour the ashes out in a particular place next to the altar, and they would be absorbed there in their place. Roughly speaking, second. No. All right, I'm not going to find what I'm looking for right now. Okay, but here, we'll use this. So this is the overhead view of the outer altar. And this, roughly this place here on the inside of the altar is where they would take and put the ashes. Okay. Okay, so now this is talking about the person who's come to clean the menorah. So if he walked in and he put two eastern lights, Bartanura explains, Hana Savar Menorah Mizrach Uma'arav Himunacha. This Tana holds that the menorah was placed from east to west, the way we described earlier. Ufa'amim shemotzei gam ha'shalukim. Sometimes he would find other ones, also the other ones lit. V'nakat shtei neirot mizrach yokim. In other words, when it says that he walks in and he finds the two eastmost ones lit, it doesn't necessarily mean that other ones were not also lit, but we'll explain, right? That we're going to differentiate between the two easternmost lights and 5 that are to the west. So nakat shtei neirot mizrachiyot dolkin. So it talks about the two easternmost light lit, mishum d'shar neirot afilu dolkin mechabana midashnan. Because if he finds the other lights, even if they were still lit, he would put them out and remove their ash. The Elu shtei nerot, and these two easternmost ones, imitzaan dokin eino mechaban. If he found that they were lit, he would not put them out. Va'od, and further, Mishnah b'seifa, since it says later on in the Mishnah, mitzaan shekavu la'elu achiyot choser madlikan. If he found these two easternmost ones that they had gone out, he goes back and he lights them. Ubishar neirot mitzaan shekavu eino madlikan ad ha'erev. The other ones, if he found they went out, he's not going to light them again until the evening, or they will not be lit again until the evening. Right? So in this idea, this is what the Bartanur is telling us, is that these easternmost lights are going to always be lit. So either they were lit when he came in. If they were not lit when he came in, so the Mishnah tells us he's going to light them from one of the other ones that were lit, and then clean the other 5. And ultimately, we'll continue. We'll figure out when these get clean. Midashena tashar, right? So afterwards, in other words, he makes sure that either the two easternmost ones are lit, or he lights them if they had gone out. Then he cleans out the other ones. What are the other ones? Chamesh neirot shelitzad. Those are the 5 lights that are on toward the west. In other words, you're right, it's the 3rd through the 7th, right? The first one is the first one he would come, that's the easternmost one. The second one is the next easternmost one, which, as we'll see in a moment, the second easternmost one is called the Ner Ma'avi. It's called the Western Light, not because it's the most Western, it's because it's next to the most Eastern. It's going to be called the Ner Ma'aravi. All right, so he's going to, though, clean out the 5 ones that are furthest to the west. So what is the dishun? Meisir mehen Hashem and hayashan. He removes the old oil, the oil that's there, v'aptila hayashana, and the old wick, right, the wick that was used, v'hadeshen, and then any of the ash, v'noten hakol bakuz. He puts all of this into this kuz that we mentioned earlier. V'noten shemen chadash, uftila chadasha. And then he'll put in new oil and a new wick. Ulachar shchitat tamid uzrikat damo. After the meat has already been slaughtered and its blood has been sprinkled. Then he's going to clean the easternmost ones. And he's going to put to them oil and a new wick. So he does it in two stages. First, he does the 5 westernmost ones. First, he cleans those. And then he has to wait to make sure that the blood from the Korban Tamid has been sprinkled on the altar. And then he cleans the other 2 eastern ones. And this idea interrupts between cleaning up, that he's interrupting the cleaning of the menorah by waiting for the Korban Tamid to be slaughtered, blood to be sprinkled, and rallying them all at once. Mishum dichtiv baboker baboker, in the morning, in the morning. Just a second. Just to remind us. Hold on. What's the pasuk there? Just a second. Let's bring it up. About Lamed, right? First it talks about making of the Mizbeach here, and then Pasuk Ched V'alron et haneirot bein ha'arbaim yaktirena. It's still about the, sorry, I'm not focusing here. Just a moment. I'm not finding the right. Since it's late, I'm sorry. I'll prepare this for next time. I'll just finish this part of the Bartanura. I'm sorry, I'm kind of fading out. Right. So the question is, why is it that the person who does the Dishun HaMenorah, why does he do the 5 that are to the west, and then he waits until Katadam to do the 2 to the east? Because it says baboker baboker behetivat haneirot, in the morning when he cleans the neirot. So why does it say baboker baboker? It's not a baboker baboker, is every morning, right? It's this repetition in Hebrew can indicate something that goes on all the time. But here they understand. There's a drasha. Amrat Torah chalek hatava l'shnei. Divide the cleaning of the ma into 2 mornings, into 2 parts of the morning. Va'avid hatavat chamesh nerot bereisha. So do the 5 nerot first. V'hadar hatavat shtei nerot, and then do the cleaning of the other 2 nerot. Mishum dekevan da'atchil avid ruba. Why does he do the 5 first and not the 2 first? Because since he's going to beginning, he should do the most first. V'hai delo avid shita v'hadar chad. Right, so if he wants to do the most, why didn't you do 6 and then wait and then do the 1? Right? Mishum dichtiv behetivo et hanerot, because the pasuk there says when he is cleaning the nerot, when he's the lights in plural, ein hatavat nerot pachot mishtayim. So there is no cleaning of nerot less than 2. You have to at least, when you do the cleaning, you have to do at least 2 at a time. So you start with the most that you could start with. That's going to be 5. And then when you finish, you'll do the other 2. V'hane mili bizman she'ein hanes. And this is talking about the time when there wasn't the miracle. We talked about this miracle in a previous year. Kigon lachar shemet Shimon HaTzadik. For example, after the Shimon HaTzadik died, right? Aval kodem shemet Shimon HaTzadik shaya ner ma'aravi dolek tamid b'derech nes. Before Shimon HaTzadik died, all the time that Shimon HaTzadik was the Kohen Gadol, the Ner Ma'aravi, which, as mentioned before, is the second from the easternmost. That's the Ner Ma'aravi. That never went out. It was always lit, except did have to relight it every day. We'll talk about that later. But in other words, it never went out on its own. Since it was always lit by way of as we learn in a Braita, outside, that the light would shine outside of the curtain in front of the Edut, in front of the tablets of testimony. Edut hu, but the is Edut hu shashchina shora b'el. The burning of the continual burning of the menorah, that itself was testimony that the Shekhinah was dwelling in Israel. And what is that particularly? Zon ner ma'aravi. That was the western light. Shnoten bashemen kemidat chavruta, that they would put in it enough oil as the same measure as its neighbors, right, as its fellow lights. Yimena hayam matchil, and that would be the one that they would start to light from. Hayam esayem, and that would be the one to end. In other words, that would be the last one. That would be Kishaya ba leheti shtei nerot mizrachiot, when he would come to clean the 2 easternmost lights. Lo hayam dashen ela haner harishon bilvad. So then he would only clean the first light alone. Right? He would only clean the first light when he's doing the 2. In other words, during the time of Shimon HaTzadik, when Ner Ma'aravi, again, the second from the easternmost, that was always lit when he would walk in the morning. In other words, so it was, as we'll see in a moment, it was lit in the evening, and even if the other ones would be out, that one would always be lit. So what he would do, the Kohen who would clean the menorah at that time, he would only clean he would first clean the 5, and then he would wait for the, and then he would only clean the easternmost one. He'd only clean the first, and then he would leave the second one lit, ad ha'erev, until the evening, shemadliket hanerot, when he goes light the candles in the evening. Umimenu hanerot ha'acherim, and he would light all other candles from the westernmost candle, from the Ner Ma'aravi, the second from the easternmost candle. So remember, when he cleaned the first five, he cleaned them out. He added new oil and wicks, but he didn't light them again in the morning. He wouldn't light them again until the evening. So during this time, when there was always a Ner Ma'aravi that was lit, that would stay lit in the morning. And then in the evening, when he was going to light the candles, the other candles, he would light from the Ner Ma'aravi. After the other 6 lights were lit, then he would put it out and clean it and add new oil and add new wick, and then he would light it again. I think popular. There's an obvious question, or if it's a little bit hard to follow, but if you were following, we said earlier that that when you come to clean, you always have to clean at least 2. So this, we just described the case where, in fact, when during this time there was still a miracle going on, when there were only 2 candles left to clean, he would only clean one of them and not the other one. So what happens to this idea that you always have to clean 2? So that's what he addresses in the next. We're going to leave it for next time. And I'm going to stop here because I'm very tired, and I thank you for suffering through my whatever. Are there any last questions though before I go? No. Okay, Bezrat Hashem, next time we'll continue. And as I said before, I'm preparing other things. If we get through all of this, may want to go and do the sugya in Yoma that talks about the Beit HaMoked, so again, to help us keep them in place. Have a good evening, and see you.